Hello, welcome to chapter 23, which is circulation and respiration, and I am going to pick my pointer and then we are going to get going. Okay. Basically, we're looking at the circulatory system, which is responsible for the transport of gases throughout the body. The respiratory system is to get the gases into the body in the first place, and it's one of the major causes of death for us human beings. Now, in order to look at this, you need to review the idea of what diffusion is. And diffusion is materials going from a high concentration to a low concentration. So there's relatively low amounts of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, yet when our bodies are working, there's lots of carbon dioxide inside of our bodies. And so you can see the carbon dioxide is going to want to diffuse from our bodies out into the environment. And you need to have an understanding of how that. All circulatory systems consist of kind of a central pump, a vascular system, which is things that kind of move everything around, and then a circulating fluid or a circulating media, and we'll talk about that. When we talk about biological systems, there's two main things that we have. We have what's called an open circulatory system, and that is basically where the material, the circulating material or circulating media, or blood, as you could say, moves around freely in the organisms, and these can be partially open and or totally open, etc. Again, we tend to see these in organisms that don't have a very large energy requirement, and these include the arthropods and most of the mollusks. And so basically what's going on here is, while you have a heart and you have some vessels, what this is doing is it's taking kind of slow-moving fluid from the body, it's pressurizing it and pushing it back onto the body. And so this ensures that everything is kind of moving around throughout the body. It's a relatively simple system. Now, what evolved as organisms kind of needed a more constant supply of nutrients and oxygen and a way to get rid of their waste are these called closed circulatory systems. What's important about this is we have to have what's called this interstitial fluid. Now, that is the same fluid that is bathing your tissues and that's supplying your tissues with the media. However, that interstitial fluid comes from the circulatory system, and that's key, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We tend to find closed circulatory systems in, again, many invertebrates, but again, all the vertebrates are going to have this closed circulatory system. And this is a cartoon showing you here basically what's going on in a fish. We have the heart pumping high-pressure blood into the gills. This blood gets oxygenated and then goes and perfuses throughout the body, comes back to the heart to get some pressure again, and then goes back out to the gills. Trouble is with this is that as the fluid, physics of the fluid goes to the capillary bed, it loses pressure. And so that this blood pressure is not as high going through the body as it could be. And the human cardiovascular system, which is the main one we're going to look at, which is the main one of vertebrates. Again, you're going to dissect a pig and frog and things like this, but basically the pig is the one that we want to look at. In this one, the heart is the central pump. Our vascular system are our blood vessels, and the circulating fluid is our blood. It's bright red because that's what the red blood cells. And again, the hemoglobin, which is dependent on heme. This has two circuits. One that gets oxygenated, what we call the pulmonary circuit, and it goes to the lungs, and one which we call the systemic circuit, which goes to the heart and to the rest of the body. Now, this is basically separating and looking at the two segments. We could look at it. You will also dissect a pig heart, which is roughly the size of a human heart. And basically, here's what's going on. In this picture right here, we are showing this organism's, this human being's, right and left side. So here's the right side, even though that's your left side, and here's the left side. What's going on is heart in the ventricle, the pumping part of the heart, goes out through the pulmonary arteries into the lungs. This is the only case where we have arteries carrying deoxygenated blood that's been deoxygenated by the body. This blood then gets oxygenated and comes back through the pulmonary arteries into the atria. Again, this is a pre-pump vessel. The purpose of the atria is to pump blood into basically the ventricles so that the ventricles are always filled, and so that's maximum efficiency. From the left ventricle, this material goes up through the aorta, it spreads, half of it, some of it goes into the head, some of it goes to the lower portion of the body, it then goes through all the tissues, loses quite a bit of pressure, gets collected back up by the veins through the inferior and the superior vena cava, going into the right atri, and then the cycle starts again. I want you to know very much how that cycle occurs. Again, when we look at this, basically when the heart, it's very important that the heart pumps at its rhythm. It has these valves inside of them, and the valves only work when there's a certain rhythm. And all of you know, I've surveyed this a number of times, all of you know what a heartbeat sounds like. Lub dub, lub dub, lub dub, or you go dub dub, dub dub, dub dub, dub dub. And what's going on in that first sound, lub, is basically the atri contracting, pushing the material into the ventricles, and then those valves shut. You know, we don't hear it. That's what we hear, is you hear the valves shutting. Okay? Again, that takes roughly about a fourth of a second. You then, the atri contract and gives us all the pressure, and that's what we call a systolic stroke. And then the heart relaxes for a little bit, and that gives you the lower pressure. And so again, when we look at our blood pressure, we have a spike right when it's right when the blood is pressurized and pushed out, and then when the system relaxes, the pressure goes down a little bit, but not all the way. It does not go down to zero. Shouldn't go down to zero. The four main types of vessels that we should know about are arteries, veins, and capillaries. You should know what those structures are. And so here what we see, basically what you got to look at is the musculature on the arteries is much greater than the veins. The veins have these valves, and then the capillaries are very small. And this is a picture of a capillary, which is basically one cell thick, and it allows materials to flow through. So this is what we call that interstitial fluid that we have. And again, in this area, diffusion is going to work. And diffusion is very efficient on here because, again, most cells are only 1 or 2 cell lengths away from a capillary. And so every new tissue that we have to have new growth of capillaries to go into there. The next thing you want to look at is what are the components of blood. Again, have an idea of what the red blood cells are, what the white blood cells are, and a little bit of kind of what the platelets are and what some of the diseases are of that. You should know blood typing, and basically blood typing is due to a sugar moiety that's attached to the cell. People who have the A sugar set up have A-type blood. People who have the B have the B-type blood. People who have both, you have parents who have both, can have both, and people who have neither of these have O-type blood. This is very significant in talking about transforming blood because O is the universal donor. AB is the universal recipient, and we'll talk about, and you'll hopefully go over that a little bit. The next thing that we really want to talk about that is a big part of this setup is basically respiration. How do they breathe? And in cellular respiration, we're looking at how individual cells use oxygen and glucose to produce carbon dioxide. And we talked about that in metabolism in the very beginning of class. We talked about the equation for respiration. Now, when we're talking about so this is the equation that you would see on there. When we're talking about respiration, usually we're talking about kind of the inspiration and exhalation, breathing in, breathing out. Animals get their oxygen from the atmosphere, from water. What we see is air has quite a bit more oxygen in it, 21% compared to the 3 to 5% in the water. The gas exchange occurs on the respiratory surface. The thing with your respiratory surfaces is they have to be moist in order to take up air. If they're not moist, then it's a pretty good seal against doing that. And again, that's why we see in things like worms that is very moist out covering. They can get enough oxygen from their from basically diffusion through their skin. Many animals have gills, which can increase the surface area. So here we have this trouble with the worms is that we just have this surface area here. What we see on things like fish is they have these gills where we have these little villi here, and it makes it very efficient to exchange oxygen in there. Chickens have lungs, caterpillars have spiracles, there's a number of organisms that are out there. And so I have an idea of roughly how these work. Again, most land-dwelling animals, the respiratory surfaces are folded into the body, and they open to the air through basically narrow tubes. Again, insects breathe by what we call a tracheal system. If you get a chance to look at that, that would be good. And that's about it.